What does bold look like to you? Many of us stay trapped in the wrong situation for too long because we're afraid to take risks or make changes. But living our best lives requires that we choose ourselves and take bold action. This week, I'm talking with Leigh Burgess, founder of Bold Industries Group and author of Be Bold Today. Here, she shares the story of how severe burnout led her to leave a successful career in healthcare and start her own business. Leigh and I talk about her bold framework and how to use it to regain control of your own life. She also emphasizes that you can be bold incrementally and at a pace that works best for you. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Leigh. It's so great to have you here today. I would love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
Sure. I am Leigh Burgess, and thank you for having me. I am the CEO of Bold Industries Group, a company I formed in the middle of 2020. I got to a point in my corporate career, which I'd had for over 20 years at that point in time, and I was just burnt out, and I needed to make a change. I needed to choose my health, which every level of health was just a wreck. You name it, it was not in good shape from a health perspective. And I had tried to do what would be the normal look for a job, apply, and it just wasn't moving. As of course, it was also the pandemic as well. So I just got to a point by August that I quit. So I resigned, gave my notice, and then a month later was off and running with my company. And I had to really just be fueled by self-belief initially, and a little bit of savings and a little bit of my retirement, which was the runway, and had a short runway to get going. And really for me, it was just that time of my life where I did choose me, which felt so wrong, just because of where we were in the world. Also just kind of being, one that provides for our family, and, is this selfish? Is this the right thing to do? But it absolutely was. And so that was my big swing of bold in 2020, where we launched the company, which we started with consulting and added in coaching and then events, and then now the membership along with the books. So have been busy over the last 5 years in addition to doing those types of things, and just excited about what's ahead.
So can we spend a moment talking about burnout and what that looked like for you? Because what I think is interesting is burnout is probably more broadly discussed today than ever before, and rightfully so.
It's all over. It wasn't before then, though. It was really interesting because I wouldn't have called myself that. I said I was a nub. That's what I would say to people, like I just had nothing left in me. And that definitely was burnout, but we didn't call it that.
Yeah, it's only relatively recently that we started using that term. So can you sort of paint a picture of what
it looked like?
Yeah, what you looked like, what were you feeling? What was, I know you mentioned your health.
Yeah. So like my emotional health, my physical health, my mental health, my spiritual health, like when I say all levels of health were wrecked, that is accurate. So I had gained weight. I had gained almost 70 pounds that I had lost several years before. I wasn't moving. I was working 17 hours a day at a minimum. I was probably sleeping 2 hours a day. And then, whatever you got left there. So 5 hours to do everything else. And I think the time of the world was just a very abnormal time too, just how we were working and I'm, coming from healthcare. So wanting to make sure we were doing our very best to help any patients and, anyone that was coming down with COVID. It was just a very scary time overall. And I think at that time, like if you had very good relationships, if you had a very good kind of setup or how you operated at work, like everything kind of shined brighter, like it just worked. if it didn't work, like I feel like it got exacerbated or, it definitely got worse for some reason during that time. Because I think there just wasn't a lot of space for much else to happen, right? So I think if it worked well, it went well. And if it wasn't going well, I think it got worse. And that could be relationships, it could be your work, it could be, your health, those types of things. So I think for me, I just was I probably ignored the signs of burnout probably, 2.5 years before then, which was, just me doing more, taking more responsibility, doing what I always did, which worked, which was just to take on more and be more responsible. And it just got to a point where that wasn't fixing it. So I was trying those same things over and over that used to work, and it didn't work. And I think that's what really started to take a toll on my health. And then once the pandemic hit, it just kind of like, it definitely went off the charts in the sense of like how much we were working. And if we had good habits, they got better. And if we didn't have good habits, I feel like it just kind of got worse. And that was me. It didn't get better.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. I think that the pandemic revealed a lot of fragile foundations
Mm-hmm.
that we thought we were on stable ground, and we realized we weren't, whether that was individually, organizationally. There were a lot of things that kind of came to the surface as a result of that.
Yeah.
And especially with the when you're in healthcare, right, there's a lot of emotional pressure and stress that you're carrying around. So I think a lot of times we think of burnout as just being overly busy, but it's more than that. It's not just
Oh,
about
yeah.
how much
Yeah.
time we're working, right?
Yeah, I think of it like a Lego stack. So like every level of those health that I talked about, those each are a different color Lego. And like for me, that was the stack of who I was. And so there wasn't anything that I could lean back on, right? Oh, that's in good shape. So let me lean into my spiritual health or my physical health or my mental health. Like, no, that's not good. Let me try the next one. And it was kind of like me just kind of going through the inventory and there wasn't anything left. And I think that's when I just got to the point where I had to make this very big choice of my health and my relationships or my job. And both were, you definitely never want to have to choose, but I think my family and my relationships always going to be greater than, although I was scared. Everything wasn't figured out. I wasn't overly confident, but I believed that I could figure it out. My family believed in me. And really that's where I started with, the bold framework. The first one is believe. So it's believe, own, learn, design. And for me, I created that framework to actually help me figure out what's next because I hadn't planned this. Like I said, I tried the different things to like find a job, but couldn't find it in the regular way.
Well, and I love that your framework starts with believe, because a lot of I would say the hesitation or the resistance to doing something new is fueled by that self-doubt and almost that sense of I have to have everything figured out before I even
Mhm.
start, right? And I often say that confidence isn't about being fearless. It's not about knowing everything. It's about trusting that you can figure it out, right? It's trusting that you
Exactly.
can handle it.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure there was a lot of anxiety, right? I don't
No,
around
I
this.
already had it, right? Like, believe it or not, like making this decision helped with that. I think, in the sense of, I think one of the myths of being bold is that, it's too late in your life. And I was 48. So who was I to kind of make this change so late, quote unquote, in my career? But I didn't feel like I could fix it or make it work. And I just knew I needed a break from a health perspective. And then the other piece of it was, I agree with you. For me, the definition of bold is moving forward, even when you feel fear and you do it anyway, right? And you're going to figure it out. And so for me, there was also, kind of counterbalancing this fear was freedom. So
Mm.
I had fear and freedom really kind of, as my mates, as I kind of went into this next phase of what would be the founding of our company. Now, I didn't sit around and try to like, uh, you know, do anything other than get active in my health and start figuring out how to rebuild it. And then also get active in like, how do I figure out what's next? Because I had never felt imposter syndrome in the corporate setting ever. I had always felt like I belonged there. I had a really, really strong sense of confidence. But as an entrepreneur, like I definitely felt it for the first time. Like, who am I? What am I doing? I have no idea. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. You know, we say this a lot as an entrepreneur, but we are honestly just being open, I think, with things we don't know and that we figure out. So I think for me, that was the first time I had felt it. And so I think that was also me really focusing in on what I owned and what I didn't own. And I think for me, I was owning so much of what was going wrong or what wasn't going right in my role that I never was able to see what went well and what we achieved. And so I think that was also a switch for me as I kind of transitioned out of that world of, focusing on what I was believing. Was it helping, hindering me, or holding me back? And then what was I owning that I should, and what was I owning that I shouldn't?
My gosh, you just jam-packed that. That was so many golden nuggets. I want to talk a little bit about the action piece that you just described, because to
Sure.
me, that is the antidote to anxiety, right? Like,
Mhm.
as somebody who has struggled with a lifetime of anxiety, if you just sit there and let it swirl, it's only going to get worse. But taking
Right.
action, even imperfect action, right? Action that's experimental, action when you only know the first step, gets you moving in that direction, right, and building momentum, which I think is so important. And
Mhm.
so when you talk about, like, you didn't just sit around, right? Like, you were doing things. I think that's important for us to remember in any situation where we're worried, we're experiencing a lot of fear. As you said, the other piece that I want to emphasize is, you said fear and freedom. And I often say, like, what's bigger than your fear? Because fear will always be with you
Mhm.
when you're doing something new or uncertain. It's the way our brains are wired. But we have to ask ourselves, what's more important than that right now? Right. And like, and almost think about it as like, what do I lose if I don't do it?
Right? People think about the cost of action, which you should think about, but we never or rarely think about the cost of inaction, right? If I don't, what happens? Well, I continue to feel this way. I continue to be reactive and negative and just a shell of who I used to be. I mean, that's how I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. So,
Mm.
like, it was bad. And it was such a bad time for the world, too. It wasn't like I could just go pick up a therapist or go kind of start something, with a different coach or do something, that, I needed something other than, a job switch. Like I needed to, really get healthy. And you couldn't do that. Like if someone wasn't already a client, you couldn't be a client. Like it was just such a crazy time. I had to drive even for a root canal during that time back to a state I used to live in because no one here would see me because I wasn't a current client. Everyone was just very careful during the pandemic, especially at the beginning where there was no shot at that point. So it
True.
was just, I think for me, it was just one of those times. It was like I had to make the choice, and I really did think about the cost of inaction because it was, I think, potentially like it could be life threatening for me. Like it would just get to the point of, what was next was possibly a stroke. Like I'm guessing for me because I was just that much, I was that far stressed out and just not doing well in coping with everything that was going on. But keeping it together, but behind the scenes and underneath the surface, just wasn't it was taking a toll on me.
Well, and what I think is interesting, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on the sort of the for lack of a better term, the purpose element of
Mhm.
what you do now. Because I'm going to go out on a limb and imagine that starting your own, I mean, I've done this as well, but like starting your own business, adding all of the elements that you mentioned in your introduction, uh, that's not a cakewalk, right? It takes time. It's
Yeah.
definitely an intensive role as well, but there's something different about it, right? So what do you think when you're busy doing what you're doing now? What's different about being busy and being engaged in this work versus what you were doing before?
Yeah, I think obviously what I was doing before was very fulfilling and, a great place for me to be. And I was still very good at my job.
Mm.
But I think it just wasn't aligned with who I had become. And I think also the burnout piece was just something you couldn't ignore. I think for me, the big difference now is who's in charge, first of all. Like, there is no, I think the corporate setting, and this is just in general, you're going through a, do work, get, get into a space and a place where you feel like you're aligned with what also brings you joy, but then you're kind of working for the next raise or working for the next title change. And that was something I did my entire career. And I was a chief by 40. So like by 40, I was like, okay, what's next? And so I feel like I had done some of the things either very fast or very early in my career where I was like, I can't just like wait 25 years and then retire. That's not how I operate. So for me, I think some of that was just, I'm glad I'm not in that anymore, because I think that also kind of spawned for me, I'm not good enough. I'm not working hard enough. I need to do more. I need to work more. Like that kind of pace and rate really, I think, did get set by this wanting to get to the next kind of milestone of my career corporately. So there's less of that. But on the flip side of it, there is an intense responsibility, right? So you're it, you know? And so I think in that sense, a typical day is really putting your head down and working. But I think the difference is at the end of the day, you move the needle, I think, more accurately, or you didn't move the needle and you need to kind of do something, the next day or the next month. I also think the interaction, I think the ability to move or pivot or improve, like you have the ability to do that, which you need to do within reason as an entrepreneur. But I think the ability to change or be more agile, I think, is really much more possible in this type of setting than in kind of the corporate world. And that's probably, very apparent, but I think those are the two things I really like. I know who's in charge. I'm not waiting for someone to tell me I'm good enough. And, I also can kind of move and adjust or innovate at a rate and pace that's very different.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because I think a lot of burnout is a lack of empowerment, right? You don't necessarily feel in control of your
Definitely.
own destiny, right? There's a lot of different moving parts that you're at the
Yeah.
mercy of, and especially in the middle of a pandemic when you're in the healthcare industry,
Yeah.
right? Like that sort of again
You just
brings
can't
everything to the
you can't
surface.
fix it, right? And like for me, it was like I'm a fixer. Like I fix everything. And
Mhm.
it was just such a frustrating thing for me that I couldn't figure it out. And that's usually even in my world now. Like if I can't figure it out, like I get really frustrated and I just don't want to be stuck. And for some reason in the corporate world, which now I know it was time to change. But at that time, like I was still trying to fix it and it just was making my health worse and worse and worse. So I think we just did it. And, like I said, fueled with a lot of self-belief, not a lot of knowledge of how to do everything, feeling ready for the next step, not the next 100 steps. And I think that's really how I had to look at it. It's like, what is next? And what is the next step after that? And am I ready? Can I do it? Yes, I can. Here we go,
Yeah.
and away we went.
And I want to ask you more about the bold framework in a moment, but I also just want to make a point here for anybody who's listening and seeing themselves in the journey too. I mean, you mentioned becoming a chief at 40.
Mhm.
I think it's really important. Sometimes our identities get very tightly intertwined with our corporate careers or whatever we're doing at the
Sure,
time.
that's how you introduce yourself, right?
Exactly. And I
Mhm.
think it's important to recognize you said I can't remember exactly how you said it, but it was something to the effect of that wasn't no longer the right fit for you, right? And I think
Mhm.
it's important to recognize that we can outgrow an environment without it being a personal failure, right? It's not that we did anything wrong.
Yeah,
It's not like our career is, we're cutting it short or anything like that, that it served its purpose, that,
yeah,
you achieved the success that you wanted to, and now you're shifting into something else and that it's okay to let go of
yeah.
previous identity.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point because I think in those types of situations, one assumes you did something wrong or they did something wrong. When in my case, I really don't think either one did anything wrong. I just feel like it wasn't a fit anymore for me, and I had tried to make it fit for extra innings or whatever, and it was just I was toasted. And so like I think, are there things they could have done better and things I could have done better? Always. And if an organization doesn't think that, then, like, I'm sorry. I really think there's always something we can do to care for people better. And especially during such a crazy time for everyone, including any organization in that time frame, just trying to figure things out. But ultimately, it was my choice. And, I needed to choose me, which felt so foreign and so wrong. And like you said, just because I couldn't fix it doesn't mean the the career was a failure, the entity was a failure, like none of that. I really feel like it was just time. In that moment, in that space, I had to make that decision, and I would go back and do it again. I think I would maybe pay attention more to the signs of burnout that were coming on, but like you said, we didn't talk about it. Like we didn't. I think that's one thing that did come out of that time frame is we did talk about burnout, and I think that it got much more attention than it ever did in 2020 to 20 probably 22.
That's a really good point. A
Yeah,
silver lining of the
I
time.
guess. Yeah, yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about believe, but I want to also talk about the O, the L, and the D. Can you say more about the
Yeah.
broader framework?
Yeah, so I mentioned the O a little bit. So it's believe, own, learn, design. And ownership really is about owning your next steps, owning and claiming the agency in your life to really live the life you want to live, knowing that you're going to have to do some things too. It isn't like someone's going to save you, which I'm sure we all have heard that. In my case, it was also stopping owning things that weren't mine. Like I would own a lot of issues or a lot of solutioning or a lot of things that no one asked me to solution or own, but they certainly would allow me to once I did, but it wasn't something that someone asked me to do. And again, that was really my mechanism for coping and how I would tackle things is just if I own it, then I know who has it, right? So I don't have to work with it or how to figure it out. But the other thing, flip side of that, was just owning when things go right, which I did not do at all. So I would skip over those pretty quickly. And I do think it's important to, celebrate the wins, small and big, as you kind of go through your life. Learning is really that ongoing growth mindset, but truly intentionally really applying the learning that you have had in your life. So like if you do the same thing over and over, which I was doing, right? I had a cycle of take on more, be the fixer, be the go-to that, like I needed to really figure out how to stop that or how to reset myself. I think also taking care of myself health wise and those sort of things was really, really important. But that growth mindset of like, when you fail, it doesn't mean it's the end. Like I've never thought that. So I think it's just really important that no matter where you're changing to or what you're changing from, like to remember there's things to learn. What did I learn from where I was and how do I apply that to where I'm going forward? And the D is design, which is really all about you hold the pen to the next chapter of your life. And what are you going to write? What do you want it to say? How do you want this to end? As you kind of go and move through, certainly as a woman at 48, making a career change to an entrepreneur, which I had never even thought was possible because it wasn't the way I was raised, was definitely bold. And I don't advise it. I say recognize when there's a misalignment between what you're doing, what you're passionate about, and what you get paid for, and start to really work and take steps towards that. And when you feel like you're burnt out or something's got to give or just there's just too much of whatever's going on, those are signs and those are sayings that you're, whether something's got to give or this is just too much, I can't take much more, but the world keeps spinning. Those are signs for you to kind of pause, reflect, and really think about what could you change, even if it's incremental. What could you do differently? So I think that's really, really important as we design our life and understand kind of how to hold agency in our life, which I do think bold steps leads to more confidence, leads to a higher level of agency in your life.
And that's a really good point, too. I think one of the things I joke about as an entrepreneur is sometimes I'll say things like, oh gosh, I really wish I had a boss. Right? Sometimes being the one making all the decisions can be tiring. But
Yeah.
when we are in a corporate structure, let's just say, for an example, there are often times when we're waiting for someone else to tell us what to do, or we're sort of, we're in this hierarchical structure. We forget that we have agency. We forget our own personal power. And so a lot of times we either overstay in a role that is no longer a fit for us, or the burnout piece that you're talking about, we stop taking care of ourselves. We think that we owe everything to this job or to this team. And so it sounds to me like one of the themes that runs through the whole framework is just this intentionality, this slowing down long enough to notice where are things working? Where are things not working? What choices do I have right now? Right? Like, where can I make different decisions? Because otherwise, we tend to be so reactive and so quick to prioritize other people's needs that until we hit that crisis point that you described earlier, we don't even notice.
Hmm. Yeah, because I really felt I wasn't that important. Like,
Mm,
it really doesn't matter how I feel. It really doesn't matter how tired I am. It really doesn't matter how frustrated I feel. Our patients need us. My team needs us. My organization needs me to do my job. And so there was this really huge sense of mantle of responsibility that I had placed on myself. Again, with a little bit of this and that throughout my career of like, just I want to do well. I want to succeed. I want to, go to the next level. But there's just a point where it's just too much.
mm,
And, for me, I really could not figure out how to do it in a way where it wasn't such a big moment, a louder moment of bold. But I think, as I went through it, I don't think there was actually any other option. So I knew that I needed to do it. And I think that sometimes as women, we don't do the thing we know we need to do when it's time to do it. And if that makes any sense to anyone that's listening, I hope it does. But like, if you know you need to do something different or make a change or stop or start something, like just think about, like I said, how you could just incrementally get there, even if it's not an immediate, black and white type of moment. Like, how do you just start stepping toward that change or having that conversation about the change needs to happen, or taking a pause, like you said, slowing down enough to notice that it's not working. Because I didn't slow down at all. I just kept trying harder and harder and harder.
mm. And so, I mean, the way that you're talking about it, it sounds like being bold in the framework that you outlined for us is a way of life. It's not something that you use at pivotal moments, right? It's
Right.
actually a way of approaching, because you mentioned incremental, right? There, everything that we do is cumulative. Everything
Hmm.
that we do leads us somewhere, right? So if we can start to put some of these practices in today, even if it seems insignificant, how we handle a certain meeting or how we handle a certain conversation, that all adds up to something.
Right. Right. Like you said, we're either going somewhere, we're going nowhere. So I'd rather go somewhere. And it is incremental. And I think that's really important because one of the myths of being bold that I talk about too in the book is that everything's big and loud. And it's a whole continuum of being bold, the quieter side, how we talk to ourselves, how we reframe our own language. That we speak to ourselves, all the way up to kind of the incremental step toward, or the conversation, or the I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to stop a particular cycle in my family, or I'm going to just, I've gotten wrapped up in something that I don't need to be wrapped up in so tightly. So it's the incremental steps that add up. And like I said, my example is big and loud. I don't advise it, but I think it is kind of a tale of like, if you don't pay attention to the signs, if you feel like you can't do anything else, you're right. So I think for me, fueled with belief, and like you said, being an entrepreneur is not, rainbows and butterflies every day. You have your really good days and you have your low days. I feel like my lows last shorter than some of my lows that I was having, certainly by the time I left the corporate world. So I think you can be a fit wherever you feel like you fit. And I just got to the point where I just felt like I didn't fit at that point.
Hmm. And I think that's just going back to what you said too about really listening to your body, listening to the language you're
Hmm.
using. I can't even count how many people I've talked to who have said, the signs were all there, but
Yeah.
I missed them, or I just plowed
And other
through.
people could see them.
Yes.
You couldn't see it, right? Yeah. Because I think my whole family could see it. And I just was working hard in my mind. But they're like, it's not healthy. It's not good. You're not okay, And so, even though they tried, like it took me getting to that point where I just had to make that choice. And the day I did it, they cheered. I mean, they were so happy for me. They were happy that we were going to figure it out and that I could be, just less of a stress ball and healthier and, come back into the world a little differently than I had been.
Is there for people listening who are, thinking, "Oosh, that's me," right? Is there a one like first step that you would recommend, or any kind of sort of practical thing that they can start with?
Sure. Yeah, because I mean, I think the other thing is there's a myth that just being bold is careless, reckless, and you're just
Hmm.
looking and without, you're leaping without looking. And it isn't that. It's one of the most pragmatic things you can do. For me, financial stability was one of my biggest fears that I had was like, how will we pay the bills? How will we do X, Y, or Z? So if it's something similar to what I've described and you feel like, you need a change, if you need a change that changes kind of the scope of kind of what you bring in or what you're doing, having that fiscal check and looking at the numbers, the X's and the O's is really going to help you know, okay, I need to wait 3 months, or I'm going to take some incremental steps. I'm going to save a little bit more here. And then I'm going to, propose being an advisor. And if that doesn't work, then I'll resign. Like you can think about your exit strategy can be whatever you want it to be. And it can take as long as you want it to be. But what's nice is saying in 2 years, I'm going to leave, or in 3 years, I'm going to leave, or whatever it may be. Usually, once you have a plan and you know the what ifs, you start to take action sooner. And that's what I've seen with my clients and those that I coach is once they change or put the date out there, and they can change the date, they can make it earlier, they can push it back. They're totally in charge of that. But I think once you kind of say, here's the moment or here's the variable I'm looking for, X number of savings or a certain payout or a vestiture or whatever it may be, I really do think that financial piece is probably a good step if it's related to kind of changing your job or changing how you'll operate in your work.
I think that's a really good tip because sometimes we think in all or nothing terms and we feel like, uh-oh, now I've got to leave tomorrow, right? As opposed to
Right? Yeah.
you can create a runway of any length because if you don't have that peace of mind or your anxiety, it's going to be counterproductive, right? Because the anxiety is just going to continue to skyrocket. But no, even just psychologically knowing I have a plan, I like that you use the term exit strategy. That will come with a renewed sense of power too.
Yeah, and you're in charge, right? And no one needs to know about it. Like
Exactly.
obviously you might have close loved ones or, a partner that you're working with or even a parent, like my mom is my best friend. So like she was the one I was most nervous to tell.
Mhm.
Because like she's brought up in a way of work that's like 401k and insurance and being a stable organization. Don't ever be an entrepreneur. That's so risky. So, but she was one of the people that was happiest for me too. Like it was, I mean, I remember her response was, it's going to be so much healthier, right? So I think in that sense, like even she knew. So I do think for people to understand that it can be incremental when you create this plan, whatever your what's next is, using the believe, own, learn, design process in the book. You go through exercises. You can go as slow, as fast as you want. At the end, you have your bold blueprint. So you actually have your blueprint that you can wrap your dates around or you can wrap your goals around so that you feel definitely more in control and having higher agency of what's next. Versus if you don't do anything at all, like all you can do is react to what's happening. And it's just a much more proactive way to live.
Exactly. And so I'd love to let everybody know you mentioned the book. Where can people find the book? Where can they find you if they want more support from you?
Yeah, definitely. So definitely check out my website, leighburgess.com. There is a book tab. You can buy the book wherever books are sold, online or in bookstores. So definitely pick it up if it's something that is of interest. And then the website really gets you into kind of everything I'm up to, where I am and my traveling, and then to follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Excellent. Well, I'll make sure those links are in the show notes as well. And thank you so much, Leigh. I really appreciate your sharing your story with us. I love your model, and I just appreciate the work that you're doing. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.